My name is Emily Carter, and I am 29 years old. If you saw me a year ago, you would have seen a woman full of dreams, despite the dark cloud hanging over her health. I was fighting a diagnosis that scared me more than anything else in this world. But even with fear living in my chest, I was determined to survive. I had a husband who held my hand through doctor appointments, whispered promises in my ear late at night, and told me again and again that we were in this together. We started saving for my surgery. Every spare dollar went into a special account for the operation that could save my life. No vacations, no fancy dinners, no new clothes, just hope and sacrifice. And through it all, I believed he was sacrificing with me because he loved me, because he wanted me to live. I thought I was lucky to have someone like him. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. And it would take losing everything I thought I had to finally see who he truly was. This is not just the story of betrayal. This is the story of how betrayal taught me to rise. The diagnosis came on a cold Tuesday afternoon. I remember the way the doctor's voice softened, the way he avoided meeting my eyes when he said the words, "You need surgery, urgently." I clutched my husband's hand so tightly in that moment it hurt, but he squeezed back and said, "We would get through this together." From that day on, we lived differently. Every dinner we cooked at home felt like a small victory. Every weekend spent working overtime or skipping little luxuries was a promise to each other, a silent vow. The surgery fund became sacred, a separate account guarded with passwords and promises. Every time I saw the balance grow, it felt like hope. I worked extra shifts, even when my body begged for rest. He, too, promised he was saving everything he could. Sometimes I caught him scrolling on his phone late at night looking stressed. He said he was looking for side jobs to help us, and I believed him, because when you love someone, you believe them. I wanted to believe him, I needed to believe him, but cracks were starting to form and I ignored them. I told myself he was just tired like me, just scared like me, because what was the alternative? That the man I trusted most was already betraying me. At first, the signs were so small, they were easy to brush away. A missed call that he quickly silenced. A text he answered with his back turned to me. New cologne. He said he got on sale, but that I'd never seen before. I noticed he started staying later at work more. Meetings, more deadlines. When he came home, his hugs felt different somehow, lighter, less anchored. I asked him once if everything was all right, and he smiled that same old smile and said, "Of course, love, just tired." And I believed him because trusting him was easier than facing the growing ache in my chest. When I checked the savings account one evening, just out of habit, I noticed the number was lower. Not by much. Just a few $100s. He said it was a bank fee, a mistake he'd sort out soon. I nodded and said, "Okay," because I was tired, too tired to argue, too tired to imagine anything worse. Sometimes you convince yourself not to see the truth because seeing it would hurt more than anything else. So I didn't press. I smiled when he kissed my forehead and said he loved me. I told myself he was stressed about my health, that he was carrying a burden too heavy for one man. And I carried on because hope is a stubborn thing. It stays even when it shouldn't. And mine stayed long past the point of reason. The week before everything collapsed, he started acting strangely. He was on his phone, constantly smiling at messages he wouldn't let me see. He was humming in the kitchen, tapping his fingers against the table, restless like he was waiting for something. I asked if he was excited about anything, and he shook his head too quickly, laughing it off. I wanted to believe it was nerves. Maybe he was planning something sweet, maybe a surprise to lift my spirits before the surgery. Hope again, that stubborn, desperate hope. The night before it happened, he kissed my forehead so tenderly, it almost broke me. "You trust me, don't you?" he whispered. "With my life," I said, without hesitation, because in my heart I still believed he was my partner. My safest place the next morning. He said he had a business meeting out of town, that he would be gone all day, maybe overnight. He kissed me goodbye and walked out the door, whistling a happy little tune. I stayed home alone, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the surgery date looming closer, feeling grateful. I had a man who stayed, who fought with me, who loved me. Or so I thought. Hours passed then, a full day. No calls, no messages, just silence. At sunset, I curled up on the couch, trying to quiet the unease building inside me. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an old coworker, one I hadn't spoken to in months. "Hey, isn't this your husband?" There was a photo attached, hands trembling. I opened it. It was a party, a glittering, loud, luxurious party, and there in the center was my husband, arm around another woman. Laughing, smiling, holding a glass of champagne, like he hadn't a care in the world. The woman was beautiful, young, confident, wearing a red dress that shimmered under the lights. I zoomed in on his face. He looked happier than I'd seen him in months. Maybe ever. And in that moment, the truth cracked open inside me. This wasn't stress. This wasn't fear. This was betrayal, dressed up in a suit and tie. He wasn't saving for my surgery. He was saving for someone else's party. I sat there, staring at the photo, my whole world tilting sideways. My heart wasn't just breaking. It was shattering piece by brutal piece. And deep down under all the grief, a new feeling sparked. Anger. The kind of anger that burns clean and cold. The kind that would not let me stay broken. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the glow of the streetlights outside casting long shadows across the floor. I stared at the walls, at the photos of us smiling on vacations, at weddings, at birthdays, photos that now felt like cruel jokes mocking my own blindness. I replayed every conversation, every excuse, every late night and early morning he had brushed me off. And slowly the pieces came together, forming an ugly, undeniable truth. He hadn't been working overtime to save for me. He hadn't been stressed about my surgery. He had been building a new life behind my back, preparing to step into a world without me. A world where my sickness was nothing but an inconvenience, easily replaced by someone younger, healthier, prettier, the woman in the red dress. His new beginning. I thought about the money we had scrimped and saved for, every small sacrifice I made, every shift I pushed through despite the exhaustion. Every birthday gift I declined to save a few extra dollars. All of it stolen, wasted on champagne balloons and lies. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a heavy calm settled over me, a kind of cold clarity. I pulled out my laptop and logged into our joint savings account. And what I saw made my stomach turn. The account was nearly empty. Almost every dollar we had saved for my surgery was gone, transferred over the past few weeks in small amounts. Just enough to avoid suspicion, enough to finance a lavish betrayal. My hands shook, not with sadness anymore, but with fury. He thought I would be too weak, too trusting, too broken to notice. He thought I would simply lie down and accept whatever scraps he threw my way. But he had forgotten something important. The account was in both of our names. Yes. But the business, the family name, the contracts, they were tied to me in ways he had never cared to understand, ways that I had protected quietly, silently, like an insurance policy against disaster. And now disaster had come. And I was ready, because he didn't know the real terms of our life together. He didn't know the secrets buried deep in the documents he had signed without reading. He didn't know that betrayal had a price, and he was about to pay every last cent of it. I sat there for hours, the house sinking into deeper darkness, while my mind spun faster than it had in months. Every part of me that had once craved comfort or reassurance was gone. What remained was steel, sharp, focused, determined. He had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, stealing not just my trust, but my health, my future, my chance at recovery. And he thought he would walk away untouched. No, not this time, not with my blood, sweat, and sacrifice lining his new life. Not without consequences. I opened the file drawer, where I kept all the original documents for our family business. The agreements, the amendments, the special clauses my father insisted we add when we first started. He always said, protect yourself even from the people you love. I never thought I would need it. But tonight, those precautions felt like lifelines. I flipped through the contracts until I found it. A clause tucked away at the bottom of the partnership agreement. If any partner was found guilty of financial misconduct or theft against another partner, their shares would be forfeited immediately. No trial, no drawn-out lawsuits, immediate final clean, and the signatures were right there in blue ink. Mine and his. I smiled for the first time in days, not because it made me happy, but because For once, I held something he couldn't lie his way out of. He thought he was clever stealing the savings, thinking it was just personal. He forgot that our lives were intertwined through business too, and that betrayal in one meant consequences in the other. I spent the next hour gathering every bit of evidence: screenshots of the savings account transactions, copies of the contracts, emails he sent from our shared business address to vendors setting up the party. Every tiny thread that tied him to this disaster. I did not cry. I didn't rage. I moved with cold precision, stacking everything neatly into a folder labeled with one word: justice. By the time the sun began to rise, spilling pale light across the carpet, I was ready. I called my lawyer. A woman I had worked with for years, someone who had known my family even before I met him. When she picked up and heard my voice, she didn't ask questions. She just said calmly, "Bring everything. We will handle this." I hung up and felt the first real breath of relief in what felt like forever. He thought he had taken everything from me, but he had no idea. He was about to lose far more than he had stolen, and I would be there to watch it happen. The morning felt different as I stepped out of the house, clutching the folder tightly against my chest. The same street, the same sky, the same neighbors walking their dogs and watering their lawns. But everything in me had changed. I was no longer the woman who sat quietly hoping for love to fix itself. I was someone else now, someone stronger, someone dangerous. My lawyer's office was in a tall glass building downtown, all sharp lines and quiet authority. When I walked through those heavy revolving doors, heads turned not because of my clothes or my hair, but because I carried something invisible but undeniable: purpose. When I entered her office, she stood up immediately. No small talk, no hesitation. We sat down and spread out the evidence across the polished oak desk: bank transfers, emails, receipts, social media posts, even photos from the party that night. Proof, proof, proof. She read silently, her eyes narrowing with each passing page. When she finally spoke, her voice was clipped sharp. "We have everything we need," she said. "He's finished." I nodded, but I wasn't smiling. There was still a nod of sadness deep inside me, not because I doubted my decision, but because it never should have come to this. Marriage wasn't supposed to be a battleground. Trust wasn't supposed to be a weapon. But he had made his choices. Now I was making mine. My lawyer drafted the first set of documents, a motion to freeze his access to the business accounts, effective immediately. A legal notification of breach of partnership. An order to initiate asset transfer under the misconduct clause. All I had to do was sign. The pen felt heavy in my hand, not because I hesitated, but because signing meant the final death of every hope I ever had for us. I pressed the tip to the paper, and without a tremor signed my name. When I looked up, my lawyer gave a small nod of approval. She was too professional to say it, but I could see it in her eyes. "Good for you." By noon, the documents were filed electronically. By 3 in the afternoon, he would receive a formal notice at whatever luxury hotel he was hiding in. With his mistress, I wondered what expression would cross his face. Would he panic? Would he laugh it off? Would he even understand right away what it meant? It didn't matter. The wheels were in motion, and by the time he figured it out, it would be too late. I walked out of the building into the bright, harsh sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't revenge, it was justice, and justice. It tastes like freedom. By the time I returned home, the sun was high in the sky, and the summer heat clung to the streets like a second skin. I pulled into the driveway, calmly parked, and sat in the car for a moment, just breathing. Somewhere out there, at this exact moment, he was opening the envelope, unfolding the papers with that smug, confident smirk he always wore, when he thought he was 2 steps ahead. And then that smirk would die, because this time he wasn't ahead. He wasn't even in the game anymore. I imagined it. The slow confusion crossing his face as he read the words: breach of trust, asset forfeiture, immediate termination of partnership. The realization sinking in that the family business he thought he could slide into after gutting me of everything I had was no longer his future. It wasn't even his memory. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no frantic messages, no apologies. Of course not. Men like him don't apologize until they run out of ways to spin the story, and he still thought he could fix this with charm, with sweet words and empty promises. He didn't know me at all anymore. Inside the house, everything was still just as I left it. Too neat, too quiet. The stillness of a home already abandoned by love, long before the final goodbye. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. It didn't take long. The first text came through. "Where are you?" it said. "We need to talk urgently." I put the phone down without answering. A few minutes later, another message followed. "Please pick up. You don't understand. There's been a mistake." I smiled bitterly. The only mistake was ever believing he was worthy of my trust, my heart, my sacrifice. Another text. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Let's be reasonable. We can fix this." Fix this. As if betrayal was a broken window that could be patched with duct tape, as if trust once shattered could ever be glued back together without leaving cracks so deep. The light would never shine through again. I didn't reply. I wouldn't reply. He needed to understand what true silence felt like. The same silence he gave me every time I asked for honesty and received excuses. Every time I cried myself to sleep and he pretended not to hear. Every time I begged for a future together and he made plans with someone else. Now he could sit in that silence and wonder and rot. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the first real flicker of peace. This was just the beginning. He still didn't know what else I had planned, and the next step would be even harder for him to swallow. By the next morning, the consequences had started to bloom like bruises under his skin, the kind of bruises that no apology could heal and no lie could cover. I woke up early, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't want to waste a single second of this new chapter of my life. The sun was rising through the windows, painting gold, across the floors as if even the world itself was celebrating my freedom. I brewed coffee, slowly savoring the rich smell as it filled the empty house. My house now. My life untouched by him. When I checked my email, it was there, waiting for me like a gift. A notice from the bank confirming that the joint accounts had been frozen. The business lawyer's update telling me that my husband's access had been revoked from the family enterprise. He couldn't even walk into the building now without setting off silent alarms. His keycard was dead. His passwords wiped his name, gone from every document that mattered. The fortress he thought he could inherit by sleeping with my sister was now a walled city that he could only gaze at from the outside. I sipped my coffee, slowly smiling over the rim of the cup. At exactly 9 a.m., the first call came. Unknown number. I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, another call. Then another. Then another. Voicemails piling up like trash at a party that had ended in disaster. I sat on the couch, curling my legs beneath me, and played the voicemails on speaker one by one. His voice was frantic, brittle like a man clinging to a cliff by his fingernails. "Please just talk to me. You don't understand. This was for us." It wasn't like that. She came on to me. It was a mistake. I was drunk. It was pressure from the family. "You're overreacting. You're being cruel." "I still love you. I'll do anything. We can fix this." On and on. 1,000 excuses. 1,000 desperate gasps for air. But it was too late. The clock had struck midnight long ago, and the prince he pretended to be had turned back into a liar. With empty hands, I scrolled through the voicemails with a detached curiosity, like reading messages left by a stranger whose life I had no intention of stepping back into. One message caught my attention, his voice lower, tighter, almost venomous. "You think you're smart, you think you're winning, but you're not done with me. You'll see. You'll regret this." I smiled without fear, because the truth he didn't know yet was simple. I wasn't afraid of him anymore, and he wasn't capable of touching me now. Not legally, not financially, not emotionally. He had played his last card, and it was a losing hand. I stood up, placed my empty coffee cup in the sink, and stared out the window at the city stretching awake before me. It was a new day. A day without him, a day where my life belonged to me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't dread what came next. I welcomed it. I knew he would come eventually. Cowards like him always do, when the walls close in and there is nowhere left to hide. It wasn't a question of if, it was only a matter of when. I spent the morning preparing in quiet defiance. Not hiding, not running. Just living, breathing. Taking up space in my own life again. I cleaned the kitchen, wiped down the counters, watered the plants near the window. Simple things, ordinary things. Things he had never appreciated because they weren't flashy enough to brag about. Around noon, the doorbell rang. 3 sharp, impatient bursts. Not the knock of a friend. Not the knock of someone welcome. I didn't flinch. Instead, I walked calmly to the door, checked the peephole, and there he was, my husband, or whatever version of him was left now. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his expression a storm of anger and desperation, barely masked by a fake smile. I let him stand there for a long moment, soaking in his own discomfort. Before I opened the door, just a crack. Enough for him to see my face. Enough for him to suss it. Realize that whatever we had was dead and buried. He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, stopping him before he could unleash the torrent of excuses I knew were waiting on his tongue. "You have 5 minutes," I said, my voice steady, my heart hammering against my ribs, but showing nothing. 5 minutes to say whatever you came to say, and then you're gone. He blinked, clearly not expecting the cold steel in my tone. He shifted on his feet, glancing behind him as if searching for backup that wouldn't come. "Can I come in?" he asked. I shook my head. "Say it here." Now the neighbors could hear for all I cared. Let the world see the mess he had made. He ran a hand through his hair, the fake charm slipping. "I made a mistake," he started. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was under pressure. Your sister, Stop." I cut him off. "Do not blame her. Do not blame me. Do not blame anyone but yourself." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "You were always so distant," he said, trying a different tactic. "Focused on work, so stubborn. You pushed me away." I laughed then. A sound colder than any winter wind. "I pushed you away," I repeated slowly. "I pushed you away by building a future for us, by sacrificing my own dreams, by trusting you with everything I had." He had the audacity to look wounded, like he was the victim in a tragedy of his own making. "Look, I get it," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "You're hurt, but you're throwing away everything we built over a mistake." Mistake? The word hung there, between us, foul and heavy. Stealing money meant for my surgery to throw a party. "For your mistress wasn't a mistake," I said. "It was a choice you made, again and again, and now you live with it." I started to close the door. Panic flared across his face. "Wait," he blurted. "I still have rights, half the business, half the house. You can't just erase me." I smiled then. Not sweetly, not kindly, but the way a queen smiles at a fallen traitor dragged before her throne. "You didn't read the fine print, did you?" His face twisted confusion, anger rising. "What are you talking about?" I leaned in slightly, my voice low enough to slice. "When you signed those merger papers last year, you agreed to a clause you didn't bother to read. A clause that nullifies all your claims in the event of marital misconduct. And guess what, darling? Infidelity counts." His mouth opened and closed uselessly. No words, no arguments, no weapons left. I stepped back. "Goodbye," I said simply, and shut the door. This time for good, it didn't take long for the cult cracks to show the universe has a way of dealing justice when you least expect it. And he had a storm coming that no amount of begging could stop. The very next day, rumors began to spread through the business circles like wildfire, whispers behind, hands at networking events, glances exchanged at charity galas, questions asked just a little too loudly in conference rooms. "Where is he staying now? Did you hear about the financial audit? I thought they were the perfect couple." What happened, it was almost laughable. All the faces that once lit up when he entered the room now dimmed into cold politeness or open disdain. Because in our world, reputation is a currency, and he had just bankrupted himself. The first blow landed at his so-called new start company. A call from the board, an emergency meeting, and within an hour, his contract was shredded in front of him. Conflict of interest, they said. Concerns about judgment. Image risks, they called it. But he knew the truth. They were protecting their own and he was now a liability they couldn't afford. I sat at home watching it unfold like a slow-motion car crash on the financial news, the ticker scrolling ruthlessly across the screen, his name trending for all the wrong reasons, his fall from grace, documented pixel by pixel for everyone to see, but it didn't stop there. Oh no, because karma is nothing if not thorough. The mistress, my sister, the one he thought he could build a new empire with, she left him within days, the moment she realized that the fortune she had seduced her way into was slipping through his fingers like sand. She packed her designer bags he had bought with the money meant to save my life, and disappeared without so much as a goodbye. He tried to call her, hundreds of missed calls, thousands of desperate texts begging, pleading, promising things he could never deliver anymore. But she had moved on to her next target. Someone richer, someone smarter, someone who actually bothered to protect his assets. I heard through the grapevine that she blocked him on everything, changed her number, pretended he never existed. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had thrown away a real marriage, a real partnership, for a fantasy built on lies and selfishness, and now he was alone, truly alone. Not just without me, but without the fake, glittering life he thought he deserved. One evening, as I walked through a quiet park, watching the sunset stain the sky orange and pink, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number. I didn't answer. I didn't even hesitate, because some people deserve to be left unread, unanswered, unimportant. As I tucked the phone back into my bag, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't broken. I was free, and freedom tastes better than revenge ever could. Freedom is a strange thing. At first, it feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, barefoot, wind-whipped, unsure whether you are about to fall or fly. But then slowly, your body remembers, your heart remembers that you were born for the sky. The first days after everything collapsed were quiet. Too quiet, almost eerie. No more heavy footsteps pacing the hallways. No more whispered arguments behind closed doors. No more fake smiles stretched too thin across tired faces. Just me, my breath, my heartbeat, the sound of coffee brewing in the early mornings. I made a decision. A real one. Not a decision made out of fear or loneliness or habit, but a decision made for me, only me. I sold the house we had once called home, but that had long ago turned into a mausoleum for dead dreams. I didn't sell it out of anger. I sold it to let it go, to rip the roots of that rotten history right out of the ground and give myself a chance to plant something new. The day I signed the papers, I didn't cry. I smiled genuinely, because leaving behind the past didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like shedding a heavy coat at the beginning of spring. With the sale finalized, I took the money I had fought so hard to protect, the same money he once tried to steal, and I invested it into my future, into a small studio tucked between two quiet bookstores in the older part of town. It had creaky wooden floors, tall windows that let in rivers of sunlight, and a smell of old paper and possibilities. It was perfect. I opened a small creative space, a hybrid between a cafe, a co-working hub, and an art gallery, a place where dreamers could sit, sip coffee, and build their futures. The first day we opened, I stood behind the counter, my hands shaking with a cocktail of excitement and terror. What if nobody came? What if it failed? What if I wasn't enough? But by noon, the little bell above the door had rung 100 times. Students, artists, freelancers, tourists, they filled the place with chatter and laughter and life. The life I had fought to reclaim. Every evening, as I wiped down the counters, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind me, I felt something bloom quietly in my chest. Not pride exactly. Not victory. Something gentler. Something deeper. Peace. I was no longer defined by who had hurt me, or who had left, or who had laughed at my pain. I was defined by who I chose to become in the ruins. And every single day, I chose to be the woman who stayed standing. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when the ghost of my past decided to knock on my new door. The cafe was buzzing with life. Soft indie music played from the speakers. The scent of cinnamon and coffee beans floated through the air. People laughed, scribbled on notepads, tapped on laptops, And then, through the window, I saw him, standing outside, soaked from the rain, his once proud shoulders hunched, his once perfect hair flattened against his forehead. A man who once commanded rooms now looked small. Lost, I froze for half a second. The memories tried to rush in, tried to drown me, but they couldn't because I wasn't the same woman anymore. The bell above the door jingled weakly as he stepped inside. He looked around, confused, almost desperate, and then his eyes found me. The light in his gaze flickered, like a dying candle, a mixture of hope, shame, regret. He took a hesitant step toward the counter. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice cracked hoarse, as if every word was costing him pride he could no longer afford to lose. I didn't move from my spot. I didn't invite him to sit. I didn't offer him coffee. I simply tilted my head slightly, waiting for him to continue. "I made mistakes," he said, "big ones. I lost everything." There it was, the confession. The bargaining chip he thought could buy back entry into my life, into my heart. "I don't have her anymore," he added, as if the mistress, my sister, the betrayal itself, had been some small, unfortunate detail, a footnote in the tragedy of his life. "I realize now," he continued, "you were the only one who ever truly cared about me." The words floated in the air. Heavy, wet, ugly. I took a breath, slow, steady. The entire cafe seemed to fade around us into a muted hum. "You realize now," I said quietly, "when there's nothing left to take." His face flinched like I had slapped him. Good. He needed to feel it, even if it was just a fraction of what I had once felt. "I didn't come for money," he said quickly. I thought maybe we could start over." The audacity, the arrogance. Even now he thought redemption was just a conversation away, that he could waltz into my new life and drape his failures across my shoulders like a forgotten coat. I smiled politely, smile that didn't reach my eyes, and I leaned closer, just enough so he could hear every word above the cafe noise. "You didn't just lose me," I whispered. "You lost the best version of yourself, too." He opened his mouth. Maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but I straightened up and said louder, firm enough for nearby customers to glance over. "This cafe is my sanctuary," I said, "and ghosts aren't welcome here." He stood there for a second. Two. The realization washing over him, cold and slow. He nodded once, brokenly, and turned, pushing back through the door, into the rain. Where he belonged, I watched him go. Not with hatred, not even with sadness, but with the clear-eyed peace of someone who knows some doors once closed should never be reopened. The bell jingled again. A new customer entered, laughing, shaking off their umbrella. The warmth rushed back into the space, filling every corner he had tried to darken. And me. I turned back to the counter. To my life, to my future. Without a single backward glance after he left. The rain kept falling, but this time it sounded different. Not heavy, not sorrowful. It was rhythmic, gentle, like the world itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I stayed behind the counter for a moment, feeling the pulse of my new life, beating steadily under my skin, stronger, calmer, wiser. It would have been easy to collapse after everything, to let bitterness take root where love had once lived. But I didn't want to carry anger with me. I wanted something lighter, something bigger than revenge. I wanted peace. The cafe grew busier over the weeks, not just with regular customers, but with dreamers. People who came carrying notebooks filled with ideas, painters with sketchbooks tucked under their arms, musicians cradling guitars, authors tapping stories into old laptops. Something beautiful was happening, slowly, organically. A community was forming, not around pain, not around betrayal, but around creation, around new beginnings. One evening after closing, I stayed late scrubbing the tables, humming under my breath. The lights were low. The world outside was quiet, and that's when the idea came. Why not build more than just a cafe? Why not create a foundation? A place that would fund scholarships for young women starting over. Women who had been told they were too small, too weak, too broken to dream. Women like me. I pulled out a worn notebook from under the counter. The same notebook I had once used to scribble shopping lists and reminders to pay overdue bills. Now it became a roadmap to something new, something bigger than anything I had ever dared to imagine before. The title at the top of the page read Project Phoenix, because like the bird in the old stories, I wasn't rising despite the ashes. I was rising because of them. Each donation, each event, each piece of art sold would go into a fund, a quiet lifeline for someone standing exactly where I once stood, confused, broken, desperate for just one chance to breathe again. As I wrote, I realized something important. True success wasn't about standings at the top of a mountain and shouting down at those who had once doubted you. It was about reaching a hand back, lifting someone else up. I was no longer interested in proving anyone wrong. I was interested in proving to myself that everything I had survived meant something, that my scars weren't shameful, they were roadmaps, guides, proof that I had fought and won battles most would never even see. The next morning, I placed a small sign by the register. All tips today go to the Phoenix Fund for Women Dreamers. I didn't announce it with fanfare. I didn't make speeches. I just let it sit there quietly, a seed waiting to grow, and by noon, the jar was overflowing. People believed because healing isn't just contagious, it's revolutionary. And me. I stood behind the counter, pouring coffee, serving smiles, building dreams out of the ruins they thought would bury me. It was almost poetic, the way the past always finds its way back, not with grand announcements, but with small, quiet taps on the windowpane of your life. It happened on a Friday afternoon. The cafe was bathed in the golden light of late summer. The hum of conversation wrapped around the tables. The scent of fresh pastries filled the air, and then I looked up and saw her. My sister standing outside, nervously smoothing down her jacket, eyes wide, lips pressed into a thin line of uncertainty. For a moment, everything in me went still, the memories, the betrayal. The nights spent wondering how someone you loved could gut you without a second thought. I had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, screaming, crying, turning away. But now that it was here, I felt none of that, just an endless, steady calm. I wiped my hands on a cloth, took a slow breath, and unlocked the door. She stepped inside timidly, her presence like a ripple disturbing the still waters of my new life. "Hey," she said, voice soft. Broken. I didn't know where else to go. I said nothing, just looked at her, letting her words dangle between us like laundry hung out on a stormy day. She shifted awkwardly, clutching the strap of her purse. "I made mistakes," she whispered, big ones. There it was. That same script, the familiar tune of regret after the damage was done, the same playbook he had used. "I lost him," she continued, "and I lost everything else too." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. But I didn't move closer. I didn't offer comfort. Not because I hated her, but because I finally understood something important. Her fall was not my responsibility. Her healing was not my burden to carry. "I heard about the cafe," she said. "I heard about the Phoenix Fund." She hesitated. "I thought maybe I could help somehow." Help, it almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so heartbreakingly sad she didn't understand. This life, this peace, this fire. I had built it from ashes she helped create. I didn't need her to help carry it now. I had already learned to fly without her. I looked her straight in the eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her clearly. Not as the sister I had loved, but as the woman she had chosen to become. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said quietly. "But you won't find it here." Her face crumpled, the hurt blossoming across it. But I didn't waver. I didn't crumble with her. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some lessons aren't meant to be softened without another word. She turned, pushed open the door, and disappeared into the sunset that had once looked so beautiful when we were young together. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the scent of cinnamon and coffee, feeling the steady thrum of life all around me. And then I turned back to my work, stronger, lighter, freer, because the past had come knocking, and for the first time in my life, I hadn't opened the door to let it stay. The seasons shifted as they always do. Summer gave way to the quiet burn of autumn, and with it, a deeper peace settled over my life. The cafe flourished, not because it was flashy, not because it had the best coffee in the city, but because it had heart. because every table, every cup, every conversation that passed through its walls carried something bigger than coffee. It carried survival, it carried rebirth. The Phoenix Fund grew too, scholarships were awarded. Young women who had been told they were too broken to start over were now studying, creating, building dreams that no one could steal from them. Sometimes I sat by the window in the early mornings before the world woke up, watching the sun climb slowly over the skyline, and I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had built a life where the scars no longer defined me. I wasn't the broken woman they had left behind. I wasn't the heart they thought they could buy or betray. I was fire and sea and earth and air, rebuilt, reshaped, and finally free. One evening, as I wiped down the last table and flipped the sign to closed, a girl no older than 20 tiptoed in, a little lost, a little afraid, just like I once was. She clutched a crumpled flyer for the Phoenix Fund in her hand. Her voice trembled as she asked if she was too late to apply. I just smiled and said, "It's never too late to start again." Because that was the real story all along. Not about betrayal, not about revenge, but about the impossible, unstoppable miracle of beginning again. And this time on my terms.